This happened back in the early 90s, when I was about 7 years old. My family had just moved into a new house in a quiet neighborhood in Maplewood. It was a small, cozy place, nothing fancy, but it felt like home. My parents, Mark and Linda, worked long hours, and most evenings, it was just the three of us winding down after a busy day. At that time, I was an only child, and my room was at the end of a short hallway right across from the living room. The house didn't have any strange history, and nobody ever talked about ghosts or anything like that. Still, I'd always felt a little uneasy at night, especially when I was by myself. Even as a kid, I wasn't a fan of the dark. I'd ask my parents to leave the hallway light on or let me fall asleep on the couch while the TV was still on low. Sometimes, I'd drag my blanket and pillow into their room just to feel safer. But my dad needed to get up early for work at the bakery, so he eventually insisted I try sleeping in my own room. I remember the first few nights feeling extra long. Every little noise from the heater kicking on to the wind outside seemed louder and closer than it really was. I'd stare at the shadows on the wall, trying to convince myself there was nothing there. One night, after my parents had gone to bed, I was lying on my side, facing the window. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I was almost asleep when I heard something whisper. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. It sounded like someone quietly calling my name, Eli. I sat up, heart beating a little faster. The house was still. I told myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe I was dreaming. I pulled the covers up and tried to ignore it. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was sure I was awake. The whisper seemed to come from the hallway, just outside my door. Eli. It was soft, but clear. Enough to make me freeze. I wanted to call out for my parents, but I didn't want to wake them up for no reason. I lay there, listening. After a few minutes, the whisper stopped. I eventually drifted off to sleep, but the feeling of being watched lingered. A few nights later, I was back on the living room couch, hoping the glow of the TV would help me sleep. My parents' room was down the hall, with the door closed. I was dozing off when I heard the whisper again. This time, it was closer, almost right behind me. I turned over and looked toward the hallway. That's when I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure was standing just at the edge of the hallway, where the light from the kitchen faded into darkness. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of someone or something tall and still. I didn't move. I just watched, waiting for it to do something. The figure didn't speak or step forward. It just stood there, almost blending into the shadows. After what felt like forever, I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the window, and everything felt normal again. I checked the hallway, nothing there. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, maybe a trick of the light, but that night, the same thing happened. Whispering, a shadow in the hallway, the feeling of being watched. I started to dread bedtime, but I didn't want to bother my parents. I figured they'd just tell me it was my imagination. One night after another, run-in with the shadow, I decided to talk to my mom about it. She listened patiently and told me that sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're tired. She suggested I keep a small nightlight by my bed and maybe listen to some music to help me relax. I tried her advice, but the whispers didn't stop. Now, the voice seemed a little more urgent, like it was trying to get my attention. It never sounded angry or threatening, just persistent. A week or so later, I was lying awake, listening to the soft music from my little radio. The whisper came again, but this time, it said something different. "Where's my blanket?" The voice was quiet and raspy, but clear enough to understand. I sat up and looked around. The hallway was empty, but I could feel something watching me. I didn't know what to do, so I grabbed one of the extra blankets from the couch and tossed it toward the doorway. I whispered, "Here, you can have it." The room felt colder for a moment, and then everything went quiet. I waited, listening for any sound, but nothing happened. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I found the blanket crumpled up in the hallway. I asked my parents if they'd moved it, but they both said no. I shrugged it off, but deep down, I wondered if the shadowy figure had taken it. For the next few nights, things were calm. No whispers, no shadows. I started to think maybe it was over. A few days later, I was almost asleep when I heard the whisper one more time. "Thank you." That was all it said. The voice sounded softer, almost relieved. I didn't see the shadow. That night, or any night after that now, years later, I still remember those nights clearly. I don't know if it was a ghost, a dream, or just my imagination running wild. What I do know is that the feeling of being watched was real to me, and the whispers felt as clear as anything else I'd ever heard. I don't get scared of the dark anymore, but sometimes, when the house is quiet and the lights are low, I think back to those nights in Maplewood. I wonder if anyone else has ever heard whispers like that, or seen shadows that don't belong. When I was about 16, it was a Friday night, and my whole family was out for the evening. I honestly can't remember why, but I had the house to myself. Back then, I was really into gaming, especially strategy games, like Star Fortress. I'd spend hours at my computer, sometimes losing track of time completely. That night, I was deep into a match in my room on the first floor when the doorbell rang. To lose my focus, I paused the game and went to the door, calling out, "Who's there?" like I always did when I was alone. A soft voice answered, but I couldn't make out what was said. It sounded like a woman. I opened the main door, but kept the storm door locked, just in case. Standing there was an older woman, smiling widely, with her hands behind her back. I asked if I could help her. She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a kid, my parents drilled it into me, ever let strangers in, no matter what. I felt awkward, but I told her there was a community center a few streets over that might have a phone. Deep down, I knew it was closed at that hour, but I just wanted her to leave. Her smile didn't fade, but her tone changed. She said, "It's very rude to turn away someone asking for help." I apologized and explained it was a family rule not to let anyone in. As I slowly closed the door, she just stood there, still smiling, but now it felt a lot less friendly. I went back to my room, trying to shake off the weird feeling, but the doorbell rang again. There was no way I was opening the door this time. I tried to convince myself she was just lost or confused, but something about the whole situation felt off. I tried to get back into my game, but then I heard a tapping sound on my window like metal hitting glass. My desk was right by the window, and I had the blinds closed, but I could tell it was coming from outside. My room was the only one with a light on, to wait things out in the living room with the lights off. After a few minutes, the doorbell rang again, several times in a row. I tried to calm myself, telling myself she was probably just confused. Eventually, I decided to open the door and see if there was someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, the woman was gone. Instead, there was a man standing there, maybe in his 30s. He asked if I'd seen his mother. I told him yes, she'd been at my door earlier. He apologized and explained that she sometimes wandered off because of memory problems. He asked if he could come inside for a minute. I felt uneasy. Why did he need to come in? I told him we could talk through the door, and mentioned I thought she might have gone to the backyard since I'd heard something at my window. He thanked me and walked off, supposedly to check the backyard. I peeked out the back window, expecting to see him searching, but there was nobody there, no sign of either of them. The whole thing felt wrong. That night, I went to bed early, leaving the TV on for comfort. Sometime after midnight, I heard the same tapping on my window metal against glass. I remembered the woman and the man from earlier and decided to see what was going on. I lifted the blind just enough to peek out. There she was, the same woman, standing outside my window, still smiling. This time, I could see she was tapping the glass with a kitchen knife. I dropped the blind and crawled back into bed, heart pounding. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again, several times in quick succession. The tapping stopped. I stayed in bed, refusing to answer the door, and waited for the sounds to go away. I didn't have a cell phone back then, and for some reason, I didn't call the police. I just waited it out until everything was quiet. The following morning, I called my dad and told him what happened. He said I did the right thing by not opening the door, and that it sounded like someone was trying to break in. My family agreed it was best to be cautious, even if it meant being a little rude to strangers. I still wonder if the woman really needed help, and if the man really was her son. But there were too many things that didn't add up. Why did he want to come inside? Why didn't he actually look for her in the backyard? Why did she have a knife? This happened during the middle of a summer when I was about 10 years old and my younger brother, Adam, was 7. We spent most days outside, running around the neighborhood with other kids, playing tag and riding bikes until the sun dipped below the trees. On this particular evening, we finally headed home as it got dark. Our parents had a habit of going out to try different restaurants once in a while, and sometimes, if we were out playing, they'd just leave us to our games and go. When we got back, the house was empty, but there was a note on the kitchen counter, letting us know they'd be back later. Adam and I settled into our usual routine, cartoons in the living room before bed. The house was quiet except for the TV, and the sky outside had turned completely dark. That's when the doorbell rang, followed by a few knocks. At first, I figured it was our parents coming home, but it was strange. They never used the front door, and they always had a key. The chances of them forgetting their key or the garage remote not working seemed really low. Still, I got up to check, just in case. As I walked toward the door, I heard a man's voice call out, saying he was selling cookies for a local scout group. That didn't make sense to me, especially at that hour. I looked through the peephole and saw a grown man standing alone, no cookies, no kid with him, just him. He called out again, then reached for the door handle. That's when I realized we'd forgotten to lock the door when we came in. My heart dropped. I quickly turned the deadbolt, and the loud click echoed through the hallway. I knew he'd heard it. I waited for a minute, then peeked through the peephole again. The man was no longer at the door. Instead, he was peering through our living room window, looking straight at Adam, who was still watching TV and had no idea what was happening from where I was. I could see something on his waist, a holstered gun. That's when I knew this wasn't just some confused neighbor or harmless stranger. I rushed back to the living room and tried to stay calm. I told Adam we should go downstairs for some ice cream, making it sound like a fun idea. I didn't want to scare him, but I needed to get him away from the windows. He agreed, and we went down to the basement. Once there, I quietly locked the basement door behind us. We ate our ice cream and waited, listening for any sounds from upstairs. Eventually, we heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. Our parents were home. I waited until Adam was out of earshot before telling them what happened. They were shocked and called the police right away. When officers checked the house, they found clear signs that someone had tried to tamper with the front door lock. That confirmed what I already suspected. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just lost or selling cookies. The police never figured out who the man was or what he planned to do if he got inside. My brother still doesn't know the full story, didn't want to scare him back then, and I haven't brought it up since. Even now, I think about how quickly things can go from normal to dangerous, especially when you least expect it. I always double-check the locks before bed, and I never open the door to strangers, no matter how harmless they might seem. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, trust your instincts and stay safe. And if you've had a strange experience while home alone, feel free to share it in the comments. You never know who might need the reminder.